Welcome, everyone. I'm Allison Kirion. I am the chair of SAASC at San Jose State. And thank you for joining us. I know May is a crazy busy time for everyone, but this is a great time to get a few tips on the Certified Archivist exam, especially if you plan on taking that this summer. So we're pleased to be bringing you this presentation tonight. A couple things before we get started. Do us a favor, if you can turn off your cameras and your microphones just so everything goes smoothly. We will have time later for Q&A, so if it makes sense to turn your microphone back on, we can do that. Feel free to enter any questions you have during the presentation into the chat, and we will figure out whether or not we'll do those during the presentation or at the end. And with that, again, thank you all for coming, and I'm going to hand it off to our vice chair, Samantha, and she is going to introduce our speaker tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, Allison. So my name is Samantha Hamilton, and I'm the vice chair of SAASC. And thank you all for joining us tonight for one of SAASC's last events this semester. Tonight we have a very special guest speaker whose name is Joshua Kitchens, who is the current regent of outreach for the Academy of Certified Archivists. And we're very lucky to have him here tonight to talk a bit about ACA and the exam. If you have any questions for him during the presentation, please type them into the chat and we will get to them after the presentation. So with that, I will pass the mic off to Josh.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Samantha, for that really great introduction. Just as FYI, I'm using PowerPoint and closed captioning it. This hopefully is useful for everybody. It's one thing we're really trying hard to do at the Academy, is to make sure everything we do is accessible. A little about me. I'm currently an archival educator. I work at the Clayton State Archival Studies Program based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Previously, I was a archivist for a small liberal arts college in Milledgeville, Georgia. I was university archivist, digital archivist, copyright person, kind of did everything in some form or fashion. And one thing I always say when I do these presentations, especially to student groups, feel free to ask me anything about the Academy, but also I love being here to just talk about the archival field in general. So if you've got any general questions, I'm open to those as well. So without further ado, I'll kind of give you a little bit of an insight on what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to kind of give you a little history of the Certified Archivist and kind of what you can, in sort of what we're all about and why I think it's really great to be a certified archivist. To me, I really love being a certified archivist. That might sound kind of odd to some of you. It's like you take this kind of stressful test, but there's sort of more to it than that as well. But we'll talk about the Academy, talk about the exam a little bit, and then open up things for questions. I think it'll take about 30-35 minutes, sort of depending upon how quickly we go through things. But above and beyond that, that's sort of my game plan for tonight. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and just kind of jump into things. So quick couple of things to talk about is the big mission of the Academy is we're really trying to support kind of, I like to use the word building capacity in the archival profession. This is an old sort of nonprofit term, but I think it's a really good way of thinking about it. The idea of building capacity is taking the people that are already there, taking the resources that are already there, taking the body of knowledge that's already there, and helping it kind of be the best that it possibly can be. And what we do as the Academy is we do two things. Of course, we have the exam, which we'll talk about it in a moment, but we also have people do a recertification process. And the way we go through this is we promote the sort of general collective understanding of what the archival field is, what archivists know, as well as what archivists do. And we've kind of created this sort of standardization process. So we can kind of talk about how those sort of ideals, I don't want to call them perfect ideals, but sort of understanding of the archival work, understanding of what archival knowledge is. Brief history, we have been around since 1987. at least as an idea. Originally sort of thought about from SAA Council, then eventually in 1989 being created as an independent group. Right now, our membership, we grew in 2009, which was one of our big years, to 1,000. We're almost at 2,000 at this point with certified archivists. In terms of what our organization governance looks like is we have a sort of board that's made up of several regents who do different things, and then the traditional kind of board, officers, presidents, vice president, treasury secretary. Our different regents sort of do different things that are related to the work of the academy. So we have one regent who oversees a group of people who help create the exam, write all of our questions, think about everything people should be reading. I worked with the exam development regent for a few years as a member of what we call the exam development committee. Then we have a regent whose job is to help people maintain their certification through attending workshops, writing, doing things, volunteering with the academy, volunteering with SAA or any of our regional or any of the regional archival groups. We have the outreach regent who does things like I'm doing tonight, and that's me. We also have a regent who's focused on our membership and helping them be the best possible member of the academy they possibly can be. And then we have a regent who does nominations, and then last but certainly not least, our regent who handles administering the exam. So they don't make the exam, they just try to make the process for taking the exam as smooth as possible. We also have a few other key people who work in the academy, just to kind of give you an idea. We have a professional secretariat, so they handle kind of all the business things that we need them to handle, all the questions, all the sort of process and documentation things as well. We have a sort of digital community coordinator. We're kind of reworking our online person. They've been a webmaster. We're sort of trying to figure out what the best for that role might be. I'm kind of leaning towards a sort of a marketing outreach person. We have a newsletter editor. We also employ a psychometrician who helps us with our exam and developing our exam. And then we have a lot of other task force and committees that do a variety of different work for the academy. So the big thing we're here to talk about, after kind of giving you a little insight and kind of how we think, how we function, is why should you become a certified archivist? And I'm going to give you a few reasons, but the big kind of overarching theme I like to emphasize is that when you commit to certification, both taking the exam and then maintaining the certification, what you're really saying to the profession is you want to make the profession better. You want to help build capacity and make the archival field one of the best fields that can possibly be to be employed in. And so a few important things I think about in terms of why you should get certified is it validates how you understand and how you talk about your own skills. I remember when I took the exam in 2011 is when I took the exam. That sounds like a long time. Ooh, that was a decade ago. Woo. I was sort of a new archivist. I'd been an archivist for about 3 years at that point. And I go in, take the exam, nervous as all get out because, tests are nerve-wracking kind of things. But then I walk out of it after I take it, I'm like, wow, I really knew what I was talking about. I felt a little more confident in the field. I felt a little more confident in the work. So it's really good for somewhat fighting that imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is always difficult to deal with, but having the certification does help with that. It does provide you an advantage in the job market. From my personal standpoint, I was already employed, but I was going through a promotion and tenure process. And so getting certification was one of my check marks on my promotion and tenure process, which led to, more money and more security and other things like that. It's also a way to kind of measure and think about what you know as compared to what a group of your peers would be understanding their field as well. And there is a lot of divergent thinking on some topics in the archival field, and the academy tries to understand what the general consensus is on a lot of different topics. So, for an example, one of the big things we're considering right now is adding another domain to our what we call our role delineation statements. We have these domains that cover different archival knowledge. And one of these big ones is sort of diversity, accessibility, inclusion. And it's something we feel really passionate about, or at least having conversations in it. We just redid the knowledge statements and included some things in some of our older knowledge statements to kind of insinuate inclusion, insinuate accessibility and things like that. But we really want to kind of make a bigger commitment to that as well. In terms of where people are at who are taking the exam and who are members of the Academy, we have a wide kind of population in a lot of different types of archives, from government agencies to academic institutions to corporate archives, as well as religious institutions, museums, and then we have a lot of members who are either consultants or have retired, so they're Aramaeus. It just sort of varies. And I say this to say that we try to represent the widest possible swath of the archival field, every sort of type of archivist out there, and there's some of their understanding of the field. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how you qualify for the exam. So right now, our qualifying period is over. So if you applied for the exam, you will probably, if you applied late, you'll probably be hearing in the next few weeks about your application. If you applied early, you probably already heard about that. This year, we had sort of 5 main options. Next year, we're probably only going to have 3 to 4 options for applying for the exam. I really want to only focus on the first 3 here, option 1 through 3. Options 4 and 5, these are for people who applied either last year and because of the pandemic decided to defer, or have previously taken the exam and did not pass. So options 2 through 3 are really for students just finishing up their master's degrees. And option 1 is for students who are in a program that has a concentration in archives. So you have taken 9 credit hours, or usually works out to about 3 courses at minimum in archives. If you take option 1, and this is for people who've been in the field for a little while, then you have to demonstrate 1 year of experience. Option 2 is for people with just a master's degree who have become archivists, and they have to demonstrate 2 years worth of work without that sort of 9 credit hours. Option 3 is really the one that's sort of more focused on students just graduating, just to kind of clarify things as well. This is where you demonstrate you have 9 credit hours in archival courses, and then we ask you to take 3 years and document a full sort of full-time working over the course of those 3 years. So as long as you're doing archival work, even if it's part-time, you have 3 years to sort of get to that 1,750 hours worth of work. And that really works out to 40 hours a week, 52 weeks is the math there. That's the option most students who are coming out of library programs, archive programs are going to go with. In terms of just some of the other mechanics of becoming a certified archivist, you sort of go through a phase. So you apply for the exam and you pay a $75 application fee. That covers your exam cost, that covers our review cost as well. You also have to send some information to our secretariat with the email address ACA@Cap Hill. And this is usually, unless it's one of our sort of cleared programs, you would send some information about the program you're attending. Most of the major ones, I'm pretty sure y'all's is already one of the pre-cleared one. So you wouldn't have to send that supplementary information. You'd also have to send your transcripts directly to the secretariat so we can just see that you've taken the required coursework. And then after you've taken the exam, been in the field for a little while, then you need to send something that documents that you've worked for a year. This can be a supervisor writing a letter that says you have done work as an archivist to the tune of this many hours, or someone from HR. Sometimes people send in job descriptions. I think it's a really good habit to get into capturing job descriptions from where you're working every so often. As well, I saw a question come in, but we'll answer it later. But I have a good answer for you, Heather. I saw your question come in. We'll get to that in just a bit. In terms of, the other requirements, it's the thing is you can qualify for the exam, and this kind of gets at Heather's questions, as you're about to graduate. In terms of, when you're graduating, the biggest thing we're looking for is someone with a master's degree. That's the big kind of first hurdle, I guess you could say, when we're talking about applying for the exam, is that you have the master's degree and are either working as an archivist, or if you're a student finishing up a program, then you can take the program. Then you can take the exam. I'm hoping that's kind of getting the point across. Yeah. Okay, so you've got as a tech. I think in that case, you would just have to say you have been doing the archival work there in your letter. If you've already got the degree, and then I don't know, did someone from the exam development? Yeah, that to me says you're doing the work. You just have to have your supervisor say yes, you're doing the work as an archivist. But that's really the big key cutoff there, is like you're having you have the degree. Yeah, I can understand it being kind of frustrating there, but yeah, it's just supervisor says, yes, you're doing the work as an archivist. I know this sort of titling is kind of a nudgy issue now. And I would say that if you can prove that you're doing the work, then you sit for the exam, and you just have to have someone saying, no, you're doing the work. Other sort of exam requirements to kind of move on. We sort of talked about recent graduates. When we're saying you're recent graduates, you don't have to have the full professional experience right then. You just document it, and you have 3 years to document it. And if you come in as a recent graduate, you get a provisional certificate, which is, hey, you've got 3 years to finish things up, and you do not have to pay until you fully documented that work time. That's the really big key here, is once you've documented the full 1 hour of work time, then you can sit for the exam. Or not sit for the exam, sorry. It's 9 p.m. over here on the East Coast, so my brain's a little foggy. I didn't want to have coffee this late at night. But you do have the 3 years to document the 1 year, and then once you've done your documentation of your work time, then you pay your dues, so to speak, or your certification fee. So when we talk about things as sort of, professional work, we're really just wanting to say you have been doing archival work, and focus specifically on things such as archival principles and practices, the ethics of being an archivist, and so forth. So I really want to move on to the domains and kind of how we break down knowledge in the academy. And right now we have what we call sort of 7 domains, and what we refer to as our role delineation statements. And so first is selection and appraisal and acquisition. So think of these domains as sort of the major work that archivists do. So the first thing we could say during sort of an archival process is we select, we appraise, and we acquire materials. Next, we go through arrangement description. Beyond that, and these are sort of no particular order after this, is reference and access, then preservation, outreach, managing, and then professional, ethical, and legal. In managing, this doesn't just mean, it does mean some sort of higher level thinking about what it means to run an archival program, but also major concepts such as mission statements and other things along that line that are important for our understanding of kind of how archives functions, policies, procedures, etc. We do sort of, if you think about it as sort of a universe that sort of flows, you can kind of think of it in this way, although I tend to like to think of the archival process as a little more bouncy around. sort of almost non-Newtonian in the way things flow. You know, a traditional way would have it as a nice little circle, but really, honestly, everything is bouncing around a little bit as well. In terms of the way the role delineation list materials is, we basically have things we think you should know and things we think you should do. And when we say these, do as an archivist. So we believe archivists should know XYZ about preservation, or we think archivists do XYZ when it comes to digital preservation or the like. And essentially, it's as you work through a domain, you'll see the sort of first things are always going to be these sort of knowledge statements, like we think you should know these things. Then the next will be the task, the things we actually do, the meat of the work of an archivist as well. So moving forward, just to kind of give you a bit about when the exam is this year, more than likely, the exam will be online for the foreseeable future. I can't say that we won't maybe do some in-person proctoring of an online exam, but this year we're doing our exam over a 3-day period. The exam is 3 hours long, proctored via Zoom on June 24th through the 26th. As I said earlier, our application period is already over. So skipping that other slide there, because I think I need to reorder some things a bit, is the other part about being a certified archivist. And I think this is where the certification process kind of comes back to full circle. So the exam is a big thing. It's a big moment to pass the exam, to become the certified archivist at the first moment. But the real sort of, I think, best part about being a certified archivist is actually recertification. So every 5 years, a member of the academy has to recertify. And you can do it a couple of different ways. First is by retaking the exam. That's a straightforward way of doing it. You could sit and take a test again. Or, and I think this is the better way to go about recertifying, is by petition. And when someone recertifies by petition, what we ask for them to do is sort of demonstrate that they are contributing to the profession or doing continuing education. And this is where we're really helping to build capacity in the field. Yes, if you take the exam, that also means you are staying up with the current literature, because we remake our exam every 2 years. So the exam is staying fairly current to what the profession's talking about, what the profession's dealing with. But if you go through petition, you are saying, I've done X number of workshops, I've maybe taught some workshops on my own, I've volunteered in various organizations, I've done all these other things that demonstrate that I am contributing to the field. And ultimately, this is where I think the Academy is really wanting to help build our profession up, is by encouraging our members and actually asking our members, requiring our members to be within the field, to, you know, not stay static, engage with new ideas, engage with new topics, participate, whether it be through volunteering or through professional development, and document that. And honestly, I recertified by petition 2017, I think, is when I got mine, 2016. And that was one of the best things I had done in a long time, because I had to sit there and say, well, I did this, I did this, I did this. And it made me feel really good. It made me feel like I was really actively engaging with the profession through working with, you know, the local archival org, the Society of Georgia Archivists, or teaching workshops, or engaging and going to professional development, going to workshops on things I didn't know about. And teaching classes, all this other kind of stuff. And it really was the best part. And that made me think about how I kind of worked with the field and how I was engaging with it. And it kind of really clicked for me, I guess is how I'll say, with the field. So, oh, forgot about this. So we do have some links online. I think I shared them early to be shared here. And of course, PowerPoint decided it wanted to blank out my links. which is really great as well. But at these links, so we'll have to give thank you. You've got information about getting certified here, as well as other information there as well. Previously, we've had a handbook that we've used. We're moving away from a handbook model to putting more of the information directly on our website, including the role delineation statement, as well as, instead of having a handbook, having more of a study guide for studying for the exam. We are also doing some study sessions leading up to the exam. We've had 2. There's another one next week on May 12th, where we kind of talk about how you might want to go about studying for the exam. We're also going to do some kind of decompression activities a little bit at the May one, which is in next week, and then more at the June one, because that's right before the exam. Other things you'll see on our website is, how to apply for the exam. We do provide awards to our members, including revamped Legacy Award, which will go to things like workshops for our members, as well as other opportunities for funding. News, our newsletter, which is sort of our big way of getting information out right now, and then different ways to get involved. We have lots of opportunities for certified archivists to become involved. I'm about to form a branding committee because we need to do a whole branding exercise for the Academy, which will hopefully be fun, as well as other things there. Just a quick note, if you need anything on the Academy after this session's over with, please feel free to either email our secretariat, Mike at ACA at Cap Hill, or you can email me directly at outreach@certifiedarchivist.org. That's a quick way of getting in touch with me. I usually try to get back with everybody within 24 to 48 hours, depending upon how things are going. With that, we've shared the website. And actually, I am going to move over into a questions period. If you would like, I'll leave the captions up with just a blank screen as well. So thank y'all, everybody, for letting me muddle through that. And do we have any questions to start us off with?
Thanks for that wonderful presentation, Josh. And as he said, please type your questions into the chat if you want them answered, or you can feel free to grab the mic and ask away. I have a question to start off. Out of curiosity, what is the format of the exam like? Are you allowed to share anything about that?
Yeah, so it's 100 questions. You get 3 hours to take 100 questions. They're multiple choice. An example. So let's do this real quick. If you give me a couple of seconds. No. Sorry, I'm trying to find a set of slides real quick so we can talk about this. I was going to give us an example question. Essentially, the questions are sort of traditional multiple choice questions. You might have like 2 answers that seem plausible with only one being right, and 2 that are really obviously false. And so those are as available. So our first question from Christopher comes in, and so he's finishing his MLIS, and he wanted to pivot to being an archivist. So I usually recommend a couple of things. One, of course, is, so if you're going to do the exam, you'll be working on the exam for next year. Look at our study guide. So the study guide has a full list of readings that we recommend everybody kind of work through. And once you work through those readings, kind of work through the domains and think about kind of how they relate to the different domains. So kind of work through our list over the course of a year, and then start thinking about the different kinds of content that's in those readings. And I usually recommend sort of a traditional kind of study process, sort of read something, take notes, and then ask yourself questions about everything. So, what was the main point of this? The same things we've learned as graduate students and how to read things, like how do you diagram a reading and try to get to the salient pieces and information out of it. And then we have our study guide online, which I kind of recommend as a good tool to sort of think through the different areas, define concepts in your own words. And then I always recommend trying to teach. And then, of course, everything with archives, doing the work helps reinforce the readings. So you're not just sticking in pure theory as well. So advice for finding paid positions. So one of the things I really recommend, and this is what I talk to my students at Clayton State, is be really flexible where you want to live. And I know this is a hard thing, especially if you have a family and you have a spouse, you have children, that might be more difficult. But if you have flexibility, there's always positions, but they may require you to go in different places. My first gig, kind of as a secondary kind of archivist, not sort of like a records management kind of gig, I moved to Culpeper, Virginia, right out of undergrad with a bachelor's degree, to try to start thinking of, public history, library work, archival work. And I lived in Stevensburg, Virginia. If you don't know where that's at, it's fine. It's like a post office, a gas station, and a bunch of cows as well there. And then eventually I was able to move into DC and do some work kind of in DC, the DC area. So I always recommend, if you can be flexible, be flexible. The other thing is to think about, as you're finishing up work, I've heard several people talk about going to doing volunteer work. That's always good. The more experience you can have on your resume, the better as well. I don't have the exam passage rate right off the top of my head. It was pretty high, I think, last year. It was over 70%, if I remember correctly. Heather's really, and I'll go back to Heather's comment here. Yes, you can see a lot of the older books on A-Books, and pretty easy to get to. I recommend leveraging your library borrowing permissions that you have right now, and borrow ILL. If y'all have got a consortium you can borrow from, do that as much as possible, because I love our field, but we have like 2 publishers, maybe 3 publishers, and because they're small publishers, the price of books are really, really high. So the more you can borrow, at least as you're studying for it, until you have the capacity to be able to buy the books, do that as well. I would say some people will get a pay bump. I've noticed this especially for corporate archivists. So if you're kind of cool with exploring corporate archives, the certification really helps in corporate archives. I've had the head of the Coca-Cola archives tell me this, and a couple of other places, because in corporate archives, that certification is just a really easy translation for a pay bump. Demonstrate something. They get certifications over maybe higher ed as well. If you're in an academic library and you have like some kind of promotion, or if you're a tenured archivist, tenured librarian, it can be one of the things that goes to your promotion and tenure kind of process. We can always talk about the whole issue of what does it mean to get promoted? What does it mean to go through tenure? That's a whole nother bailiwick of a conversation. But for me, when I went up for my promotion and tenure and I had my certification there, it was kind of a check mark in, I think it was on the professional development, scholarly kind of activity kind of area of my application. I can't even remember how it is. As a teaching faculty, it's a completely different form that I went through than when I was sort of administrative faculty in a library. But that helped me get a pay bump, because there was a pay bump when you got a different rank. So my 2 experiences says yes. It also depends on, a lot of libraries don't have a tenure process, but they do have like a scale process. So you'd be like a library 1, a library 2, library 3, and you can use the CA exam to demonstrate the need to go up in those scales. So yes. I do say there is appears there. Yes, I lived in Culpeper as they were building the film vault outside of Culpeper. I used to drive past it when I went to go to Walmart because we didn't have a Target yet. And I think they built a Target after I left, but I remember. This was 2006, 2008. So yeah, I never got the privilege of working or seeing that facility up and running, but yeah, I remember that as well. Great questions. Yeah, I did that. Then I went to George Mason for grad school and worked in the George Mason archives and then a couple other different places too. But yep, it was right there. Culpeper was a nice place, not bad. Better after I left from what I hear because it actually developed a little bit more, but yeah. Very nice people. There's a really great, it's a Mennonite run grocery store that's like down the road. That's not in Culpeper, that's outside of Culpeper that I used to go to all the time. That in Charlottesville was not too far away.
Do you know, I have a question.
Sure.
Do you know if you already work in a library or an archive, if your employers would be open to the idea of possibly paying for your certification fee as part of professional development?
That is a good question, and that depends on the organization. Some organizations will pay for professional memberships and professional fees as part of your professional development, whether it be training or out of general funds, but it really depends on the organization. Some will, some won't. It just depends on the kind of environment that's been built and how whoever the fund manager is feels about the funds. I mean, I use, like in my institution, we use our funds to pay for our memberships because we decided to do that and no one tells us not to. But they're really, yeah. But it really depends on your organization as well. So it goes either way. The smaller the institution, sometimes the less likely you might be to get that kind of funding. Sometimes businesses have a pot of money you can use and get reimbursed. It just depends. And I hate to say it that way, but yeah, you can get lucky, but sometimes you can make a case and you can say, I want this money for this. And then, if you don't ask for money, you won't get money. Like right before I got the current position I'm in, I said I wanted a research grant. And so I applied for a research grant. Then I had money opportunity. I'm like, oh, guess what? Leaving. I'm going to use this money. But I had it, and then I could have used it to go do research. Great question, too, from Heather about do archivists stick around? So it sort of depends. So I would say archivists that I've seen in sort of more traditional archival roles, such as kind of processing, maybe kind of front of the house to some extent, but definitely people who've been either put back of the house or have smaller institutions, they probably stick around longer than the 5 year mark. I feel like people in digital archives seem to move a lot. And this has sort of been my experience with digital archivists. They seem to shift a lot. I mean, there's always a digital archival job, and you'll see the same jobs coming up every 3, sometimes 2, as short as 2 years. You'll see them kind of shift. So that's my anecdotal understanding of it is traditional places, people can kind of stick around, hold on. Digital work, they seem to be shifting. And I think that's because you can always, once you get a little bit of experience, you can move on to a different place as well. I will come back to Corey's question. I'll answer the exam virtually. Yeah, I think we're going to always administer it online. We've invested in an online system, which I think is better for everyone because it means that we can score our tests faster as well. I'm hoping to encourage maybe doing some in-person proctoring. So tell everybody to bring their laptop and we can just monitor everybody on site. That's what I'm going to be advocating for once we have kind of stopped doing sort of pandemic as well. But I think we're always going to have an online version. And I agree there. It's a lot more cost effective to be able to proctor it online for both participants as well as for us to some extent as well. But yeah, we're definitely going to keep having a online version. I don't know if we might do some in-person proctoring, but yeah, we've committed to doing this online testing. It's similar to a lot of organizations out there, such as ARMA does all their testing online. You can test at any time as well. We may move to different periods of testing in the future. So there might not just be the one time a year. We may have different rotating periods. So that might be something that's coming up too. Favorite part about being an archivist? That is a fun one. I actually would probably say, and this has sort of been one of my big revelations as I've spent years in the field, is getting to talk to people. And that's actually my favorite part, whether it be reference work or acquisition work. And it's just having those kind of conversations with people, helping them make the connections, whether it's to donate something here or to do a research project and to make the connections with different parts of a collection. That's really my favorite part as well. Okay, oh, craziest experience. So that's a loaded question because there's a couple of different things that could be loaded there. There's, yeah, I'll answer Alex as I'm sort of pausing to think through as well. Oh, so I can give you interesting collection piece here. So I've got one there. We will be probably keeping it multiple choice just because it's really hard to grade exam test in an efficient and fair way, I think. But right now, yeah, we're probably going to be staying vocal choice. So my favorite kind of story on archives that I think is really, really, really interesting. I really have two, so I'll give you two real quick. So first one is we had a researcher who is a member of the Rotary Club. And Rotarians are always doing really great fundraising for all kinds of different things. Well, it seems that in the post-war, so 1948 to early 60s, Rotary Club was really big into sponsoring study abroad and exchange students. So they spent a lot of money bringing students from specifically places the US had engaged with during World War II. So Europe, Korea to some extent, Japan. You would see a lot of exchange students sponsored by a Rotary go across the US. And our institution that I worked for, Georgia College, which was a women's college at this time in the 1940s, 1950s, had a lot of that. Our president at that time was a big member of Rotary, traveled around the state talking to different Rotary groups, worked with them, got exchange students. Well, funny thing happened in 1948. We ended up with a male exchange student from Germany. And the interesting thing about this story that I was sort of helping this researcher track down is that the student got kicked off campus. And the reason was he was harassing the female students. He had also been a member of the Hitler Youth, so he was still conditioned as the sort of, yeah, that sort of mentality. And so he came here, he was only supposed to be a temporary kind of gig, and he basically got shoved off campus after a quarter because he was causing way too much of a ruckus. That is one of the more interesting things I've ever found. My other favorite one is, do I have any, I know I saw one MA in history. Is everybody familiar with Eugene Genovese in terms of Southern history and writing on the plantation culture as well? This might be a name that's unfamiliar with a lot of people as well. For those unaware, major figure in historiography, not necessarily correct depending upon the school of thought. I would say not very, very correct, but needless to say, influenced generation of historians. Well, going through one of our faculty papers at Georgia College, we had a professor named James Bonner. He is a major agricultural historian on the editorial board of the Journal for Agricultural History. And we find one of his review letters for Eugene Genovese rejecting an article for the journal. And so here we can see a major scholar goes on to kind of impact the field very majorly, gets a rejection. It's a reminder that every scholar, regardless of who you are, will get rejected by a journal by somebody at some point in your career. And it doesn't mean that you don't know what you're talking about. It just means that's how the journals work. And to me, that was one of my sort of favorite things as well. agree. Yeah, that whole paternalism idea doesn't really hold water so much, but I won't get into that discussion too much. I'm sure I'm not completely surrounded by historians.
I've got a question.
Mhm.
Would an internship in an archive count towards that professional experience?
So we usually don't take internship hours as counting towards it. It's really supposed to be paid professional work. Even if it's temp work, that's still fine. That will count. But internship is supposed to be educational work. We have had debates. I'm not going to say we haven't had debates about this, but right now the line of thinking is that's educational. Even if it's a temp job, saying you're a temporary worker that's doing archival work, that would count. So that's the line right now.
Got it. If you have any more questions for Josh, please feel free to type it in the chat or grab the mic.
For the Academy, it's outreach at certified archivist .org. And I just do it in the chat. So Aaron, that's a little harder to quantify. If you could make the case you were working with, say, I'm trying to remember the correct term here, basically the site files, the dig files, and working with those as archival collections, not so much the artifact collection, because really artifacts are processed and managed completely differently than archival collections, because it's usually like an item level kind of organization as well. And that would be, probably the way. But it's, if you're working with like the case files and the dig site files, and there's a word for it. I'm trying to remember the actual word. I worked for the Park Service, and while I was doing more sort of educational kind of outreach stuff, I sat in the cube across from like the head archive guy, and I can't remember what the word he used is, but it's in the back of my brain right here, and I can't think of what it is. But it's really going to be more about the files that come from the various dig sites and that kind of work as well. But good question. Yeah, no problem. But there's still plenty of archival work that can be done. I've worked with people who were archaeologists to try to help them think through their archival collections as well, because there are some really great archival archaeology collections. There's some good articles about that too.
I'll give everyone another minute to type in any last minute questions you might have for Josh.
And just a reminder, we'll have our recording of tonight's event and a blog recap up within about a week. I posted links to pretty much every way you can connect with SAASC in the chat, but if you missed it, just click the link for our website and you'll find all the links there. And before I forget, we have our happy hour on May 18th at 6 p.m. So it's your chance to pick the brains of graduating students, or just pick the brains of everyone who's trying to figure out which classes they should keep, which classes they should drop, and which instructors they should avoid at all costs. So please join us on the 18th if you can. I think, what do you think, Samantha? I think everyone pretty much has asked all their questions, or did they? One more. Yes, I see Stacy.
Yeah, I answered it in the chat real quick. I actually have 2 master's degrees, archive master's degree and an MA in history, and a lot of years work in archive as well. So, the archives degree is sort of considered terminal, just like a library degree is considered terminal. So I was able to teach with that. But I am working on a history PhD because at heart, I am a public historian. And so, and it's also free. So I'm doing free-ish. It's one of those perks with working for the university system. So yeah,
it's intellectually expensive, but
yeah,
nothing coming out of your pocketbook.
Right. But that's my path. I could also say, and I love to talk about this. My very first job was a proto-archival job. I was a file clerk. And so my first job was a records management job that I didn't realize that until about 7 years later when I was really starting to work in archives. I'm like, oh, I've kind of always been doing this. I literally have never in my entire adult working life not worked with records, which I think is really weird, and I don't know how that happened, but it happened. So.
Now we just call things different titles and different categories, and you're like, oh wait, I've been doing that. They just didn't pay me for it. All right, well, that was a really great presentation, and I think that helped to answer a lot of questions, especially as students. We're all still trying to figure out how do we navigate this career path, and how do we prepare ourselves. So thank you so much for all that advice and information. Samantha, anything else you want to add on?
Josh, you just have a lot of thank yous pouring in, and thank you for putting together this wonderful presentation, and for everyone else for attending, and we hope to see you at the happy hour on the 18th.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.